Welcome to Professor Sky's Spam channel, where I talk about anything that's not new music. And oh boy, am I not talking about new music. I'm talking about soccer. A sport which I have it's sort of like jazz music or classical music. Every couple of years I acknowledge that I like it, I try to learn more about it, and I try to get more into it because it's something that I like but I don't fully understand. So I first cared about soccer back in 2000 when I moved and lived in the city of Marseille in France for a year. It's basically necessary to care about the team in Marseille when you live there. So that was the beginning. I went to my first soccer match there. And sort of ever since, I've been slowly building up my knowledge, slowly building up my understanding. You need to understand that I played soccer up until second grade. My friend Tim scored a goal and it was taken back because I was offsides. And I didn't understand what offsides meant, but I did know that I cost the team a goal. And so I just said, forget it, I'm not playing this sport anymore. And like most Americans, I had sort of a derisive attitude towards soccer going on from then. But this is the thing. If you like any sport at all, okay? If you're one of those, I hate all sports, you're off the hook. But if you like sports at all, I think there's a sort of moral imperative to understanding and even appreciating soccer. It is an American chauvinistic opinion to dismiss soccer. It is an American chauvinistic opinion to say that it's boring or that it's stupid or that it's for the rest of the world. It's even a borderline imperialist perspective, like the rest of the world loves something and I'm going to make fun of it. So you don't have to like it, but I do think you need to understand it on some level. And it's the World Cup right now. I'm recording this in between matches. I've been watching every match so far this year. And America is going to be playing Iran. And so I'm going to release this right at the end of that. The second that match is over, I'm going to hit publish on this. And I also wanted to provide some commentary about World Cup 2022 that's more than just Qatar bad. By the way, Qatar bad, everything about slavery and bribery and all that's true. But let's go further. Let's actually study soccer a little bit. So I'm going to tell you two things. One, how? Like, how can I enjoy soccer? Somebody who never played it, didn't watch it growing up, didn't have any real reason. So I'm going to talk about how do I enjoy soccer? Like, how is it something that I can enjoy? And maybe if you watch this channel and you like me and my perspective, maybe you can learn to appreciate it in a similar way. And I'm not going to do the same things that most people do when they tell you how to like soccer. I'm not going to do that. And then I'm going to give you a guide to YouTube. You know, I found a bunch of good YouTubers this year who have really helped me to understand the lore, the strategy, everything about the sport to like it more. So let's start off with a couple things. One, I'm calling it soccer. Who cares? The debate about whether or not you call it soccer or football is almost as stupid as the debate on Hawaiian pizza. You can't put pineapple on a pizza! Or is Die Hard a Christmas movie? These are debates that are beneath you, unless you're a complete idiot, okay? We call it soccer, they call it football. That's it, it doesn't matter. There's no inherent value to either term. They just exist. And if you think that it's a big deal, just sign off and unsubscribe because it just doesn't matter. It's just a sport. That's just what we call it. Okay? We can call it Willy Waws if we want. So that's my first point, you know? I'm not calling it soccer to be like, take that, football fans. That's just what I've called it. And you want to call it football? You want to call it footy? You want to call it Juego Bonito? You go for it. Doesn't matter. Okay? The other thing I want to emphasize is it doesn't... If you're American, and statistically 50% of you are American who watch this channel, you don't have to care about the American soccer team. It's not a prerequisite. America is so messed up because the people who are trying to push soccer are so convinced that the only way Americans can care about soccer is if the American team is good. It's just not true. It might help with a certain with certain parts of our population. You know, it turns out we almost won the first World Cup in 1930. I guess we came in third place, something crazy like that. Uruguay, I think, ended up winning, if I remember what I've been learning recently. But it's okay. Like we don't have to win. It's good when we compete, but we need to divorce our mind of this concept that the only way Americans will like a sport is if we dominate at it. Because let's face it, we don't need to be babies, okay? We dominate in so many sports, in the vast majority of sports in which we compete. It's actually okay, and I would argue good for our country to be not the best at something, okay? We can handle it with hockey. Okay, we beat the Russians or whatever at Lake Placid, but in general, we know we're not the best in hockey, and we can enjoy hockey. Let's do that. Let's get soccer up to hockey. But I will tell you later, there are reasons to root for America. In general, I don't root for America in international competitions because I don't like the nationalism that it brings out. But anyways, that's just a couple things to get out of the way. Another thing to get out of the way. It's boring. I have really bad news for you if you think that soccer is boring. All sports are equally boring. 100% of sports are equally boring. Golf is as exciting as soccer, is as exciting as American football, is as exciting as Formula One, is as exciting as NASCAR, is as exciting as curling. It doesn't matter. We are human beings who are capable of such great thoughts. And when you understand a sport, it is no longer boring. Without exception. I've tried this. When I lived in France, I got sick one day. I'd never watched a race in my life of any sport, and I bought a magazine on Formula One, and by the end of the week, I was a Formula One fanatic because I learned about the sport and the racers and the drivers, and I learned about it. If you think soccer is boring, it's because you don't have an imagination and you are not putting in the effort. So it's fine. You can say, I'm lazy and I don't care about soccer. Cool. You got it. But I will not let you say that it's boring. And all you Europeans who are out there watching going, same thing is true about baseball. Baseball is not boring. Baseball is as exciting as soccer. It's as exciting as the Running Man, okay? If you understand the sport, it's great. So this is just one of my sort of general theories about most entertainment. I will say that I used to think it was boring because when you don't understand the strategy, it's very confusing. Another thing for Americans is the systems in place are very confusing, and it's not our fault. It's not our fault that America created a series of perfect leagues that are totally legible and understandable. Major League Baseball, the National Football League, the National Basketball Association. Like, you have teams, they're always there, they compete, there's a format for the playoffs, they move on, that's it. It's simple. Soccer is so international that for an American it is bewildering. First of all, transfers. I had to spend like half an hour learning about what transfers were. There's leagues. There's like 5 different elite leagues. There's 3 different elite leagues, 5 different competitive leagues. Individual members of individual teams can compete leagues, and then there's other leagues and other leagues for other leagues, and then usually you can win the Premiership, but then you win the Premiership, but that doesn't mean you win the FA, which is what used to be the Premiership, but now there's the Premiership, which isn't the same thing as the Championship League, which isn't quite the same thing as the European Championship League, but which, way too much going on here. Again, I'm going to give you some hints on entry points for caring, okay? I'll explain a lot of this. Like, I could explain to you the difference between the FA Cup and the Premiership Championship in English soccer, but I'm not going to. But I will say that learning about it has helped me. So let me give you some ways to appreciate soccer. The easiest time to care about soccer is right now when the World Cup is happening. It is, I think, as big as 10 Super Bowls. That's how many people watch this. So how do you care? How do you care? It's not too hard. Just have an opinion on every match. Every match, pick a team that you like. There's a couple of different reasons you can like a team. The easiest one is geopolitics. You certainly have an opinion on different countries. If I'm telling you that Denmark is fighting Senegal, okay, you probably have a sort of deep down opinion of like, which country do you think needs the win? You know, like maybe you've been to Denmark and you want Denmark to win. That's fine. Maybe you have Danish family. Maybe you love Lego so much it's ridiculous. You know, like there's always a reason to care. Sorry, one of my dogs is having a nightmare. Hey, Bobo. That's that little yelping sound. So that's one way to care. Just pick teams because you like them. A funny thing, though, and this is the most difficult thing with soccer, the number one problem with soccer. People say, oh, it's hooliganism. Yeah, but there's a bigger sense. And that's the problem of nationalism. So that's where soccer, especially the World Cup, gets really dangerous. You know, my wife is from former Yugoslavia, from the country that's now known as Serbia. And you might think, I've been to Serbia, you know, my Serbian family members. I'm not allowed to root for Serbia. Because Serbia and nationalism, it doesn't go well together. I can't root for Croatia either. Same reason. I can root for Croatia as much as I can root for Serbia. You know, these countries where the nationalism came up and set them apart each other and made sure that when my wife was growing up, there was a war happening, you know? Like, it's the sort of complex thing that you don't get, you know, when you decide that you're going to be a fan of the Green Bay Packers, you don't have to deal with these kind of deep-seated histories, you know? So that's an interesting thing to always keep in mind, the relationship between geopolitical standing and nationalism. So what team do I root for? It might not surprise you to know I am a French professor, so I root for France. But I'll tell you why. I'm going to tell you why France is basically the only team you should root for. France is one of the teams that confounds nationalism. So nothing is better for somebody who believes in a country's superiority than winning the World Cup. It's like the Olympics, right? It's part of what sports does. In 1998, France was seeing a huge upswing in nationalism and in racist nationalism, white nationalism. Huge, huge movement at the National Front, the far-right group that was going against any immigrants. The thing that the French team does is it amplifies the cognitive dissonance inside the minds of racist nationalists. Because when France won the World Cup for the first time in 1998 on home soil, they did it with a person whose family was from Algeria. Zidane. They did it with a whole number of children of immigrants. The value of immigration is obvious to anybody who studies. If you study immigration, you know that immigration helps countries. That's just what it does. We all great powers in the world would be stronger, healthier, more vibrant societies in every single corner of our existence if we had a better, more open immigration system. Okay? That's just what the data tells us. But soccer helps to make that clear. And the French national team is such a beautiful mixture of the kind of French people that are the stereotypical French people with names like Giroud, you know? And then at the same time, you have people like Dembele, where that's not the typical name, or Mbappe, right? So even though the French national team does not solve racism, the far right is still ascendant in France. And it doesn't matter if they go back-to-back with the World Cup this year, the far right wing will still be anti-immigrant, will still be racist, no matter how many dog whistles or agreeable-looking politicians they put in place. But still, it ratchets up the cognitive dissonance. So that no matter what, when they're sitting there and they're waving their flags and they're saying France is great because I was born in France and French is for the French people, they have to, on some level, turn off the fact that this glory was brought to them by the immigration that happened in their country. It could not have happened without it. So that's why I root for France. That's why I root for Belgium. Okay? Like, that's why I root for these countries that are so ethnically mixed, because it is evidence to the world of the value of immigration into these countries. Now, obviously, this is obscene. These countries should know this fact just in general. It should not take the best athletes in the world doing that. I'm not excusing the racism, but I am telling you there is a part of it that I just love. I love having that cognitive dissonance turned up, you know, where they have to say the French are the best, but what makes someone French? So, you know, that's why I root for France. If you want to join me, join me. I mean, they're one of the best teams, so that's nice. I rooted for them when they were not one of the best teams as well. By extension, because I teach French, it's fascinating because the history of sport is the history of the world, right? I mean, that's a fun thing, And so my son and I, we did a thing when we went up to the concert. He's really into geopolitics, and we counted how many languages were represented in the World Cup. English, French, and Spanish are tied with official languages. 6 countries from each are represented. If you count sort of like sphere of influence, so Tunisia, and Morocco do not have French as an official language, but they are languages which you can basically speak there. That puts France ahead with 8. So I root for any francophone country. That's just a general thing that I do. I like it. I like the history of it. Senegal just beat Ecuador, which is great. And then sort of beyond that, you just sort of root, at least I do, I just sort of root for the underdogs. I mean, like what other sport, like Brazil is the powerhouse, there it is. Like South America creates all these powerhouses, these countries which are so often overlooked or marginalized in world society, and they're capable of taking the world stage, So why should you root for the U.S.? Now, they might be out. When I release this video, they might be out. But I'm going to tell you why to root for the U.S. Not for the nationalist reason, okay? Not for the reason that we want to go USA and we want to be like that prick, Alexi Lalas. Man, I hate that guy. I've been watching the coverage. He is the most mansplaining, insufferable, sexist jerk I've ever seen in a sports broadcast. And I've been watching sports broadcasts my whole life. I don't know how he's getting away with it. Man, he's obnoxious. Anyways, hot take on U.S. soccer. Landon Donovan seems like a pleasant enough person. But a reason to root for the U.S. is not because USA, because we have to win, but because America would be a better place if soccer were more popular. One reason is, do you see this map behind me? Do you know the number 1 speaking country of Spanish in the world? It's Mexico. Do you know the number 2 largest country with Spanish speakers? It's the United States of America. So understanding that soccer is the most popular language in most countries where people speak Spanish, I think in all countries, so already it's acknowledging that fact and it's helping, I would say, helping that. But also, what if everybody who got their big break in American football got their big break in soccer instead? What if a highly selective sport, highly cost-intensive sport like football or like hockey were replaced by what essentially requires just a ball? Even basketball requires more financial investment. Soccer is this great egalitarian sport with a lot less concussions. So I think if America does well, I don't care how we have to do it, if we come on board also, that brings us more in line with the rest of the world. We sort of fight a little bit of this American exceptionalism that we get when we get to be so proud of how little we understand about soccer. Also, in a political way, I always root for the U.S. women because that's something we should be proud of. Title IX is something we should be proud of. We shouldn't be proud of like USA, but how awesome is it that like our women sports athletes are so great because we've been at the forefront of making sure that women have access to sports. So I always root for the U.S. women. Plus, Abby Wambach is like a local hero around here. So that's the World Cup. I hope you picked a team. Tell me in the comments what team do you root for, and why is it not Germany? Germany's the hardest team to root for. It's sort of like not very diverse, and you definitely like German nationalism. Even though they're much better about it now, it's not usually a great look. You know what I mean? But still, they're actually a really fun team to watch. And it's funny because like different countries have different styles. Like the more you watch, the more you get into it. So what about club soccer? How do you even break into club soccer? Club soccer, I mean like the individual teams, Europeans and the rest of the world have it so easy. They fly to New York City and then they buy a little hat that says NY on it. And then they can like the New York Yankees or the Mets, But how do you even start to pick a team when there's so many leagues? This is what you do. One, you pick one winner. You pick one team because there's only like 10 teams in the world that can win what's called the Champions League, which is like this all-star league that happens. You just pick one of them, okay? You pick one of them that you like. You take a list of a whole bunch of them, and then you say, that's the team that I would like to win out of all those. Already you have a rooting interest, okay? So I want to talk about the great paradox of what's been happening from my position. So the team that I root for in the Champions League is Paris. The reason that I care about soccer is because I lived in Marseille, and I love the team from Marseille, l'Olympique de Marseille, OM. To root for both teams at once is, talk about cognitive dissonance. That's like saying my favorite teams are the Red Sox and the Yankees. Okay? That's like saying my favorite... Like, you can't say that. But let me explain. The only reason that Paris is any good is because they have all this Qatari money and they're able to pay everybody. But their best player is France's best player, Mbappe. And they're the only French team that plays in the Champions League. So if I care about French soccer, I have to root for them. But meanwhile, when I root for France, I hate Paris. I have almost gotten in fistfights with people because of their love of Paris. When I lived in Marseille, I went to the soccer game between Marseille and Paris, and I saw the Parisian fans coming in, and they were blocked by police officers. And the Marseille fans would take rocks and throw them over the police officers to hit the Paris fans. I can sing the chant, Paris, Paris, va-t'en cul, Paris, Paris, va-t'en cul. I can say this over and over again. I hate them. I saw Marseille beat them back in 2000. It was the greatest. I remember walking through the streets and seeing people who had license plates that ended with 75, which is the postal code of Paris, and the Marseille fans would take the license plates, take them off, and then piss on their cars. And I would see that and think that was cool, okay? That's how crazy I went for Marseille. So anyways, that's just a bizarre thing. Hopefully Marseille will eventually get back on top again. That's the team that I root for. That is the only team that I will always root for, that I have a very vested interest in. And then I just sort of have fun. I just kind of go through the rest of the leagues and I just sort of pick teams. I root for Juventus in Italy because Zidane used to play for them, and I lived in Marseille. Zidane is from Marseille. I used to teach kids who grew up on the street where Zidane grew up, like this great French immigration story of the greatest soccer player of all time being Zidane. Come at me in the comments if you disagree. The greatest player of all time coming from Marseille, first generation immigrant. Like, I used to go for walks along this little place called the Corniche in Marseille, and they had a huge poster. And the huge poster was for Adidas. And it has a picture of Zidane's face, and it says, made in Marseille. And you think that's cool, but the coolest thing is he's looking out over the Mediterranean. So he's looking out from here down to Algeria, where his family's from. And it's this reminder of Marseille as being this cradle of the Mediterranean, which has seen all these Italian immigrants and all of these Algerian immigrants. It's just beautiful. Spain, I root for Barcelona. Now, I never thought that I'd root for such a popular team, but I watched one of these videos and it explained that the Real Madrid and Barcelona fight is basically a fight between the city of Madrid and the city of Barcelona. I'm from Boston, so I always root for the second city. Marseille is the second city, so obviously Barcelona is the second city to Madrid. But beyond that, General Franco supported Madrid. The fascists and right-wing people in Spain partly indicate their alliance to that worldview by supporting Madrid. So of course I got to root for Barcelona. Beyond that, they were one of the last people to ever have advertisements. They used to have advertisements for UNICEF instead of taking the money. That's awesome. I didn't have an opinion, and now I actually love them. My favorite team in England is Sheffield, because I remember being told about all the soccer teams, and someone said they're called the Sheffield Wednesdays because most of the players were Jewish and they didn't play on Saturday. They had to play on Wednesday. I think that's great. My favorite British team used to be Manchester City, but that was back when Manchester City was terrible, and I thought that was the cool contrarian thing to say because everyone liked Manchester United. And then I turned around and Manchester City is now the team for busters, and Man United is not as successful. True story. One of the Glazers, the owners of Manchester United, lived next door to me. He was going through a weird time, and he had to rent a house, and the house next to me was I don't live in the kind of neighborhood where you'd think sports franchise owning billionaires would live, but there you go. So, anyways, I do have a team in Serbia. I root for Niš, Radnici Grada Niš nemaju pečat. And then in American soccer, I root for the Revolution, because I actually went to, I think, 5 games of the inaugural season of Revolution because my friend Brad had tickets. I just paid no attention. So there's my ways of caring about soccer. I'm now going to give you my little YouTube guide if you find that interesting. So these are the sites, these are the pages that help me to better understand. Step number 1, look up any video about offsides. If you don't understand offsides, soccer makes no sense to you. It'll take you 5 minutes. There's videos, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and 7-minute description of offsides in soccer. Look it up. Next thing you need to understand is the positions. It's the hardest thing to understand because there's so little action in soccer in terms of scoring that you have to understand the positioning and ball movement. So I'll include a couple links in the description about how the numbers on the back of the jersey actually pertain to the positions that they play. I'll include a link from someone named K's Performance, someone named Progressive Soccer, where they talk about these different positions and how they factor in. The number 1 website for understanding soccer is called Tifo Football. It's a mixture of story and strategy. So they have great stories. They talk about the popularity of soccer in America, and they describe it quite well. They talk about famous players. They talk about things like why the ball in 2010 was different. They talk about the value of different managers. But then also they have amazing videos like guides to different formations, because the thing is, there's the goaltender and then 10 players. And then how you set up those 10 players is all the strategy. Like that's why the coaches are so important, the way those players run around and where they go. So you can have those 10 broken up into 4 back, 4 mid, 2 front, or 3 back, 4 mid, 3 front, or 2-5, whatever it is. And so they go through and they explain it and they take it through history. And then once you understand that, then watching soccer isn't boring anymore, because you're watching all of these formations go through, and then you're seeing the way these guys called wingbacks are running back and forth, and you see what kind of crossing is. The more you learn, the more you like it. The second channel you have to check out is called Iconic Football. It's by some guy named Tanahashi, I think, and he does a great job. Like, I'll include a link to a video, The History of Tottenham, which is a British Premier team. Sort of like, he goes over the history of the team, which helps you to better understand sort of the long history of how these teams matter to these different towns. And then he actually breaks down their strategies, like how they use to win. And this is like building together so you better understand the nature of soccer, so you're not just waiting for goals. He has another great video like on Neymar and on teams and players. He's very enjoyable, very likable, very funny. If you like YouTube in general, Iconic Football is just the best one just to watch, even if you don't care about it. Someone else named Raymar, I think he might be American or Canadian. He just has a whole thing about why players are great, which is nice because it helps you to, like, if you have these names in your head of like Ronaldo and Messi and Zidane, like he actually helps to explain those to you. I'll include there. And then finally, the last thing you can do if you want to learn to appreciate soccer is something I've never done. Just play FIFA. Every American that I know who loves soccer is it's always been dudes, but it doesn't have to be men, some dude who just played FIFA and turned to love it. I have a piece of advice for FIFA. They should give away FIFA to Americans. They should give the game away. They lose $60, but you give it to Americans, and Americans who play FIFA like watching soccer. So they know what offsides is. They know what strategy is. How do you think I learned how to play to watch football? I learned how to watch football by playing Madden 94. Anyways, there you go. Did you like it? Are you interested? Are you mad at me for rooting for both PSG in the Champions League and pissing on their cars when they play against the French league? I don't know. Was this video even interesting? I don't know. What time is it? Oh, the American game's about to start. All right. Now, do I root for USA or Iran? That's tough. You know, Iran could use a win, and their players appear to be kind of going against the authoritarian regime. Tell me to root for in the comments. There's a gamer.